Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester. The perception is that this Andy Burnham is different to the Cabinet Minister Andy Burnham under the last Labour government. Is that a fair perception?
I think so. I'm very much in tune with the theme of this interview. It's more the real Andy Burnham, because in this role, I don't have the same constraints. You know, I'm kind of speaking for the place, not always the party. You know, I'm doing what's right for Greater Manchester. This is the place I'm from, the place I love. I'm at home here. So yeah, I think that just leads to you coming over in a different way. And I look back on my time in Westminster, Gloria, and I don't think people did see the real me because, like you, I guess, you know, we were loyal to the different leaders that we serve, and people use that as a sort of a criticism of me. There was a bad joke doing the rounds recently, or a Blairite, a Brownite, a Milibandite, and a Corbynite walks into a bar, and the barman says, "Hello, Andy Burnham." Well, the fact that people tell that joke says something about them rather than me, I think, because it says that they were more factional in terms of their politics. I played the loyal game, if you like, and in the end, I guess that does have the effect of people not fully knowing what your real views are, but hopefully they can see them through the work I've done in Manchester.
And you seem very happy in this role. You've got a big week next week, this week coming, Convention of the North. Tell us what that's about.
Yeah, well, the North's getting organised, isn't it? It's getting stronger. It's not going to put up with things the way they've always been. And maybe people saw that in the pandemic when the government tried to railroad us into tier 3 and we took a stand. Things have changed. And in that moment, Whitehall did not like us answering back, but they're going to have to get used to it. The North is not going back to the way we were treated before. Now, this isn't about getting threatening or anything like that. It's about being positive about what we've got to offer as the North of England. There is so much more we could be with the right support. But people in Whitehall should make no mistake. They can't continue to treat us in the way they always have done when it comes to transport, for instance, as second-class citizens that should just expect a second-class service. Well, no, I'm sorry. That's over.
You got a good ally in Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Secretary?
Well, I was his shadow in Parliament, so I was Shadow Education Secretary when he was Education Secretary, and we definitely didn't agree at that time, but we always got on. And I respected his sort of energy, if you like, as a minister. He gets things done. You know, he makes change happen, and that's what you want, surely, isn't it, in a government minister? Too many of them mind the paper clips and just they're there because they like being there and they like the idea of it. Whereas Michael actually uses it to try and get things done. And as he's gone on, I think both of us have kind of come a bit more together. And I think because we've got quite significant experience of British political life, I think we can see what's wrong with it. And it's funny that we're actually converging together on the solution, which is more devolution of power out of Westminster and Whitehall. And so it's a pleasure to work with him at times, actually. And you know, I don't mind saying that because he goes about things in a good way. He listens. Not every minister on any side does that, but he does. And I'm hoping within let's say a month or so to have signed a new devolution deal for Greater Manchester with Michael and the rest of the government, because that would be a big sign that devolution is really coming into its own.
What would you like in that deal?
Well, there are 3 things that I think are critical if it's to have substance. So number 1 on transport. I don't know if you've been following what we're doing here, but we're the first area outside of London to put buses back under public control, and that will happen this year. And the reason why that's so important is because you can then create a London-style system. Here it'll be called the B network, you know, the Manchester B, and it can't come a moment too soon because you'll be able to tap in, tap out, take as many buses and trams as you like, and then only pay up to a certain level. And that will be a game changer here. Secondly, very quickly, we're bringing through a Greater Manchester Good Landlord Charter. We're getting serious about the need to regulate housing standards. Michael is very much in that space after the tragic death of Awab Ishak in Rochdale last year. You know, housing standards, certainly in the private rented sector, but in the social rented sector as well, they're just not good enough. And we want to empower the public to hold their landlords to account. So we're bringing through a Greater Manchester Good Landlord Charter. We want powers to underpin that. And the main thing, and hopefully this will chime with viewers of GB News, the last area is technical education. We want to create the country's first integrated technical education system where it works in the same way as the academic route, as the university route, i.e. kids who are coming through school have got the same clarity about what is there for them at the end of school from a technical education system that's working very much as one with our Greater Manchester employers and giving them high quality pathways into good jobs, because there are lots of vacancies out there in the labour market. So 3 big ticket things there, Gloria, that we're hoping will be in the devolution deal.
Right, we're going to talk more about you now. Your mum was a receptionist at a doctor's surgery.
She was.
Your dad was a telephone engineer. You go to Cambridge University. So one part of your life, very strong influence, is a working class background. Then you go to this posh university. Which is the strongest on your identity?
Well, it's the first, of course. You can't ever escape your background. So my mum was a phone operator at first, actually. You know, she used to do the old headset thing in the old days, and she met my dad at a telephone exchange. I was born in Liverpool. They were from Liverpool. And this is odd, isn't it, when you're the mayor of Greater Manchester? But when I was 1, my dad got a job over here. So I grew up mainly in the Manchester area. And I'm absolutely, everything about me is from the northwest of England. You know, I love both cities, actually. And they have more in common probably than people realise. But, you know, I'm from this place. You know, my heart is here. I'm home at the moment. That's why I think people see the real me, because I'm, you know, where I'm myself, if you like, with family and friends. But the experience of going to Cambridge, I would never want to sort of deny it wasn't really important to me, because I was at university in the late 1980s, and people will remember what the Northwest was like in that era. I was growing up in the Lee area where I came to represent, and the miners' strike was a massive thing at that time. I leave the Lee area in 1988 to go to university, and I'm like, hang on a minute, is this the same world that I've come from? And I couldn't relate one to another. And for the first year or two, it was like, I just feared the tap on the shoulder. I just didn't think they would accept me. I would be thrown out. You know, eventually sort of started to feel my way there. But the big thing that happened while I was at university was Hillsborough. So I was in my Easter break in my first year, big Everton supporter, as people might know. I was back home. I was in the pub with friends who were Liverpool supporters who were going to Hillsborough. I was going to Villa Park. Liverpool were going back to the same ground where they'd had problems the year before, because everyone knew that ground was unsafe. Everyone who'd been and stood on the Leppings Lane terrace as I had done. And the next night I was back in the same pub after being at our game, and we saw people return from Hillsborough utterly traumatised. You know, and then within days, obviously, certain newspapers were blaming the supporters rather than what we knew to be the truth. So all of that happened. Then I go back to Cambridge for my summer term, and literally it was like it hadn't happened. Or to the extent they commented on it, they would parrot the line that those supporters must have been. And it was like that experience, Gloria, I guess, has been defining for me throughout my life, and was also true of my time in Westminster. I kind of always felt like kind of an outsider in Cambridge, an outsider in Westminster to a significant degree, trying to understand how that world could help the world that I really was from and cared about, and always finding it hard to relate one to the other. But that's in some ways very much my story. I've tried to live in both of the worlds that are within this country, and it's a very hard thing to do. And actually the only way to make it better for the future is to make this world here have the same standards and opportunities as people take for granted in the South.
You were an altar boy at a local Catholic church between the ages of about 7.
Not a very good one.
Ages about 7 and 10. Does faith play a big part in your life?
It does, from a sort of background, I guess, you know, in terms of values, the kind of the way it roots you, particularly from a Catholic upbringing point of view. You know, you kind of have the guilt is still there if it's kind of in there, isn't it? You know, and but there's something about that upbringing that is kind of quite, you know, sort of within, isn't it? And it never goes, even if your kind of views in terms of belief sort of go over time. No, you know, that had a big impact on me. I was an altar boy. I can't say I was the best one. I think the priest had to check the altar wine a few times just to check whether.
You were an advisor to Labour cabinet ministers before you became an MP, which is, you know, in some ways very conventional route into politics. I read that some of your special advisor colleagues, Labour colleagues, could be snotty to you and your wife? Give us an example.
I'm not sure my wife so much. I guess in terms of, well, there was, when we were kind of first kind of in that new Labour era, I can remember, not, again, feeling the Cambridge effect, not feeling like you quite fitted in. And I think there were a couple of occasions where that was how it was. I remember working at Millbank in 1997.
That was Labour HQ, yeah.
It was Labour HQ in the 97 general election. And honestly, I still look back at that as something that was my kind of first big shock when it came to the sort of Labour Party nationally. It was a very London-based operation. Not they weren't bad people, but that was a big experience really of really understanding how in life connection and upbringing and accent and all of those things does matter when certainly in that London world, be it in politics, media or whatever, as you know as well, and you've thought the same, haven't you, in your life?
Yeah. I always wanted to work for Labour Party in 97, but I couldn't get a job. But it's not about me.
Well, I was lucky.
It was pretty elitist, though. I think we both agree.
I was lucky. I had my first job in London, which was working on a trade magazine, it was called Container Management. You know, the height, say, the glamour. And I was getting more and more political because of the things that were going on. And I remember being at work one day saying, I just really want to work in politics. And the person who was next to me the next day said, well, why don't you? My stepmother's an MP. Why don't you apply to work for her? And it was somebody called Eleanor Mills, who was stepdaughter of Tessa Jowell. And to cut a long story short, I did. I applied, and that was life-changing. So, yeah, I mean, in the end, you know, the danger of people from the north, I guess, is we do ourselves down too much, don't we? We feel that chip on our shoulder too much. The truth is there's many great things about this country. It still can open doors for you that you never thought you would go through.
Yeah. Now, Labour has a problem with working class voters. You only need to look at the seats that were lost in the last general election. I don't think it's controversial to say that. How would you articulate Labour's problem with working class voters?
I think it's about focusing on the issues that they care about and that they experience every day and prioritising them and talking about them in the way that they would talk about them. I mean, a good example is here, you know, the focus we've put on bus services. When I was in Parliament 16 years, I can barely remember, can you? You know, someone from our side standing at the dispatch box saying, I'm going to make a big issue about reforming buses. Never heard it once. And yet, you know, you come back here as mayor and everyone's like, sort the buses out, Andy, they're an absolute mess, you know, cost of bus travel. And it's, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, I've kind of hope people have felt the power of devolution, because at the last mayoral election I did talk very directly to that issue, and in my kind of speech after winning I said, you know, why is it that a bus ticket in Harper Hay, Greater Manchester, can cost twice as much as one in Haringey, London?
Absolutely.
So there's an unfairness from a sort of social class point of view, because people lower down the income scale tend to use buses. But they're also much more expensive here in the north than they are in London. Deal with the issues that actually affect people directly and come up with policies that will benefit them. Are
they doing enough of that, cutting through to people? The Labour leadership?
I don't think any of the parties at the moment, if we're being honest, are really cutting through to the extent that is needed, given the feelings people have got about life at the moment. And I don't think this is a moment for sort of, you know, business as usual in terms of the way politics is conducted and the kind of framing of the way it's always been conducted, that the Labour Party kind of almost has to go along with the agenda as set by the media. I think this is a moment where people are in a crisis situation in terms of their finances, and they look around and they see trains that don't work, but the companies who run them are getting bailed out to the tune of, you know, hundreds of millions. They look at a situation where energy was all sold off, and now they have to pay thousands for their bills, whereas in other countries that's not the case. People look at housing and where everything was broken up and sold off. I honestly think the public are saying, well, hang on a minute, that stuff has not worked. It's not worked for the vast majority of people, and a bad place to end up in the middle of a cost of living crisis, because people can't afford the basics, they can't afford the essentials.
Final question. You stood for the Labour leadership in 2010 and again in 2015. Obviously, you didn't become Labour leader. Could it be third time lucky?
Well, I'm not planning to go back. I mean, I'm happy where I am. And let me say, maybe this is an exclusive for you. I will be running for a third term as Mayor of Greater Manchester. I love what I'm doing here. I think what we're building here is a big part of the answer to make British politics work better. And that is more power in the hands of a place like this. You know, this place is amazing, Greater Manchester. You know, the people here, the kind of passion that people have got, the identity. You give a place like this more power, it's unbelievable what it can do with it. And hopefully we're already showing that. You know, the energy, I think, is in what we're doing, not necessarily in what Westminster is doing at the moment. You know, we're the ones who are bringing forward the biggest act of levelling up in this Parliament, and it's called the B Network, that London-style public transport system. So I'm not walking away from that. I'm going to be standing for a third term as Mayor of Greater Manchester. What the future holds beyond that, I honestly don't know. I have said I wouldn't rule out going back at some point, but to make it clear, you know, I would like to see Keir Starmer as the next Prime Minister of this country. I want the Labour Party to bring through some of the changes that I've touched on in this interview. I hope that will be a Labour government that really does get that power out of Westminster, and that's a bold policy that they've been talking up more and more recently, which is great. But later down the line, after all of that has happened, you know, I'm not going to say that I'm going to rule that out, because I guess, I mean, having been in Westminster all of those years, now having done this for almost 6 years, I feel I know a lot of the changes that this country needs.
Fascinating. Frank, always great to talk to you and listen to you. Andy Burnham, thank you.